Scout didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just ran straight into the leaves where the sound of a rattlesnake's rattle was rising like thunder. In his jaws was the back of a little girl's sweater. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't trained. But he moved as if he knew this moment would come. As if some divine whisper had told him. Now, and in that blink. Everything changed. A child pulled to safety, a dog poisoned in her place, and a mother left, gasping in the doorway, her folded laundry still warm in her arms. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The wind that swept across the low ridges of Buffalo Creek Valley carried with it the scents of pine sap, distant snow, and dried prairie grass. It was early October in the outskirts of Cody, Wyoming, a town cradled between the rugged arms of Yellowstone and the silence of empty roads. The leaves had begun their slow burn into amber and rust, and the sky above stretched wide and unclouded, a pale blue canvas brushed with distant circling hawks. It was under this vastness that Rachel Turner stood in the doorway of her modest ranch house, holding a leash clipped to a young German shepherd's collar. Rachel was 35, tall and lean, with a quiet resilience settled into her posture, like someone who had learned to carry the weight of her world alone. Her auburn hair, usually tied back in a functional braid, had begun to gray at the temples, not from age, but from grief. A former forest rescue paramedic turned rural veterinarian. Rachel moved to Buffalo Creek the year prior, after her husband, Tyler, had died in a climbing accident deep in the Absaroka Range since then. Her world had shrunk to 3 beings, herself, her 2-year-old daughter Mia, and now, Scout. Scout had come from the Cody Regional Animal Rescue, a facility run mostly on donation and compassion, barely 7 months old. The German shepherd had been found tied behind a service station on the outskirts of town, his ribs stark against his black and tan coat, one ear torn and healing poorly, but in his amber eyes. Rachel had seen more than just a neglected pup. She had seen something alert, something watching. His fur was still a little dull from malnutrition, and his front left paw bore a small scar where rope had cut in too deep. But he walked with quiet dignity, his gait surprisingly balanced for a dog so young, unlike the other pups who yelped and jumped against their kennels. Scout had simply sat and stared through the bars, unblinking. Rachel, used to reading both the body language of animals and the unspoken ache in people, had understood immediately. This was no ordinary dog. There was a story behind those eyes, though he couldn't tell it, inside the house. Mia was sitting in the sunlight near the window, chewing on a plastic ring toy. Her blonde curls were a halo around her round face, her legs splayed in toddler indifference. She was wearing a pink sweater with tiny clouds knitted on it, one sleeve already wet from drool. When Scout patted in for the first time, ears alert but tail lowered in submission, Mia looked up and offered him the ring. Scout approached slowly, sniffed, and then lay down beside her with a small thump. Resting his head near her knee, Rachel watched this first encounter with a mix of relief and caution. She had no illusions. Scout was a rescue, barely past puppyhood, with unknown traumas. But his demeanor was oddly composed. And more importantly, Mia seemed to accept him without fear. Over the next few hours, Scout followed the toddler around the living room, neither overly excitable nor detached. Rachel took mental notes. No food aggression, no sudden lunges. Good leash tolerance so far. So good. not far down the gravel road that led to Rachel's house, behind a thicket of ponderosa pines and rusting barbed wire, lived Owen Whitaker, a retired cattle rancher, now in his early 70s. Owen had become something of a mystery in the neighborhood. Broad-shouldered and stooped from years of fence mending and wind fighting, Owen had a weather-beaten face lined like old leather and steel-blue eyes that missed nothing, though he rarely spoke more than a few gruff words at the gas station or feed store. Everyone knew one thing about Owen. The man had a soft spot for animals, especially strays. He hadn't yet met Rachel, though he'd watched her truck come and go, seen the girl out in the yard, and now, today, he noticed something new, a dog, through his binoculars which he claimed were for bird watching. Owen followed the German Shepherd pup as it sniffed the yard's edges. His frown deepened. He didn't trust many people, especially not ones who took in animals without knowing what they were doing. But the woman, Rachel, she moved like someone who had seen hard things and kept going. That, at least, he respected back inside. Rachel was unpacking Scout's small collection of belongings from the shelter. A half-chewed rope toy, a worn blanket, and a single page of intake notes. No known history, found malnourished, no microchip. No signs of overt aggression. The note ended with a scribbled line. Quiet pup. Watches people. Not a barker. She folded the page carefully and placed it in a drawer. Later that evening, as the wind picked up and the clouds gathered over the jagged silhouette of the mountains, Rachel stood by the back door, watching Scout and Mia through the glass. The pup was sitting upright, eyes fixed on the tree line, ears perked like radar. Mia sat beside him, leaning against his warm side, her tiny fingers gripping his fur as she pointed to the shifting light. A bond was forming, silent and unseen but undeniable. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself and exhaled slowly. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. Maybe they had saved each other. The sun dipped behind the western ridge earlier now, casting long shadows across Buffalo Creek Valley as autumn crept slowly but surely into the Wyoming landscape. The air was brisk, tinged with pine resin and the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and Rachel Turner could already feel the change seeping into her bones. Life had begun to settle into a rhythm again, meals, chores, moments of quiet, and always Scout at her side. It was during one of those late afternoons, when golden light pooled across the backyard like honey, that Rachel first noticed the pattern. Mia had been toddling around the yard in her fleece onesie, a sun hat crooked on her head despite the season. She giggled as she reached for pine cones, her tiny feet crunching softly on dry grass. Scout, now 8 days into his new life with them, trotted behind her like a sentry, attentive, calm, and watchful. But when she approached the back left corner of the yard, Scout's posture changed. He darted ahead and blocked her path, standing firm with his front legs splayed and head low. Mia frowned, tried to step around him, but Scout simply repositioned, nudging her gently with his nose and issuing a short, low whine. Rachel, watching from the porch with a mug of coffee in her hand, raised an eyebrow. Scout, she called, more curious than concerned. He didn't look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on that corner of the fence, just beyond the tall patch of wild grass that met the tree line. Rachel stepped down into the yard, her boots crunching softly on gravel. Mia, now distracted by a dandelion gone to seed, had already moved on. Scout, however, remained where he was, tail stiff, ears alert, eyes narrowed at something only he seemed to sense. Rachel followed his line of sight. There was nothing but a tangle of weeds, shadowed earth, and the edge of the forest. She crouched beside him and scratched behind his ear. "You're a serious little guy, huh?" she whispered. "Must be smelling a rabbit or something." Scout didn't move, and for a long moment, neither did she. By the next morning, it happened again. Mia was chasing a ball that had rolled close to that same corner, but before she could reach it, Scout intercepted her. This time he barked, sharp, singular, not loud but definitive. Rachel called him off, laughing nervously. "Scout, she's fine. Let her play." The pup hesitated, then backed away reluctantly, tail low, still eyeing the tree line. Rachel knelt beside Mia and picked up the ball. She turned toward the fence. Again, nothing, no motion, no sound, just the wind curling through the brush and pine. She shrugged it off. Puppies could be weird. Maybe Scout had a particular dislike for that corner. She didn't yet believe he was warning her. A mile up the same dusty road, past barbed wire and a row of old cottonwoods, Owen Whitaker stood with one boot propped on a fallen log. The sun hadn't quite broken through the haze that morning, and a faint chill clung to his shoulders beneath a canvas jacket lined with fleece. In one hand, he held a rake in the other, a tangle of dried weeds. He was clearing the back trail behind his barn when he noticed it, a smooth, coiled husk, half buried beneath a layer of straw. About 3 feet long, cracked at the spine, shed skin. Owen frowned and knelt slowly, turning the brittle scales with the tip of his boot. Rattlesnake. He stood and scanned the area. There, just beyond the old irrigation pipe. Another skin. Fresher. And nearby, faint indentations in the dusty soil where something had slithered recently, winding, purposeful. He muttered a curse under his breath. This, late in the year, rattlesnakes usually began retreating to their dens, but the unusual warmth of the past few days might have delayed that instinct. They could still be active, especially if sunning near rocks or tall grass. Owen looked up toward the distant outline of Rachel's house, its chimney curling thin wisps of smoke into the morning sky. She had a child, and a dog. He scowled. They hadn't spoken since the incident with the mule, Scout's predecessor. A golden retriever named Jasper had chased one of Owen's animals through his fence line last spring, leading to a fractured gate and a heated exchange. Rachel had apologized, but curtly. Owen, proud and private, hadn't accepted it gracefully since then. They kept their distance, neighbors in name, but not in spirit. Now he hesitated. He could walk down, knock on her door, mention the skins, maybe suggest trimming the backbrush. But would she listen, or worse, would she take offense? Owen turned the idea over in his mind. He didn't trust people easily, but he trusted what the land told him, and right now, it was whispering something dangerous. He kicked the dirt over the nearest shed skin and turned back toward the barn, jaw set, already wondering if silence was the greater sin. That afternoon, Rachel called Scout inside early. He came reluctantly, still glancing over his shoulder as she closed the back door. Mia lay napping on the couch, and Rachel paused beside her, brushing a wisp of hair from the toddler's forehead. Just being overprotective. "Huh?" she murmured to Scout. But the dog didn't respond with a wag or nudge. He sat beside the window, still staring at that same silent corner of the yard. Rachel followed his gaze. Still nothing. But something had changed. The afternoon sun slanted low across the valley, casting a soft golden haze over the Turner property. The shadows of the pines stretched long and quiet, draping over the grass like memories too heavy to lift. It was one of those deceptively peaceful days in Buffalo Creek, the kind of silence that made people forget the wild still breathed just beyond the fence line. Rachel Turner had spent the earlier part of the day scrubbing down the small barn behind her house, restacking hay bales and clearing out the feed bins in preparation for the colder months ahead. Now, she stood barefoot in the utility room, her jeans dusted with straw, folding warm laundry from the dryer into a basket. The rhythmic hum of the appliance had a calming effect, and for the first time in weeks, her thoughts had drifted to something mundane: chicken stew for dinner, whether she had enough time in the cupboard, and if Mia would nap early enough for a quiet evening outside. Mia was sitting on her usual quilt spread across the back lawn, babbling to herself as she arranged pine cones into a wobbly circle. She wore a faded yellow sweater, and her boots, one on, one off, were tossed somewhere in the grass. Scout lay beside her, his body half curled but tense, his nose lifted to catch every shift in the breeze. Rachel glanced out the window, saw the familiar shape of the pair in the yard, and smiled. "Just 60 seconds," she murmured aloud, a phrase every mother says just before fate decides to test her faith. She turned away and lifted the laundry basket. That's when it happened. Scout's head jerked up. He rose slowly, hackles lifting along his spine as his gaze locked on something near the edge of the blanket. His ears flicked back, his body shifted into a low stance. Muscles coiled, breath stilled. Then the sound, barely audible above the wind, a rattling, dry and rhythmic, like marbles clicking in a bowl of dust. From beneath the brittle cover of curled leaves, a mottled brown body slid forward. The rattlesnake was nearly 4 feet long, thick-bodied and cold-eyed, its forked tongue flicking the air. Tasting the warmth, it had been sunning itself near the stones by the fence and now moved, slow but sure, toward the movement and scent of the child. Mia giggled and clapped as if greeting an old friend. Scout sprang forward. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He lunged with a singular focus, grasping the back of Mia's sweater in his jaws and pulling with every ounce of strength in his growing body. Mia squealed as her body lifted slightly and scraped across the blanket. The motion startled the snake, which recoiled and coiled in the same instant, its tail vibrating a warning that was too late. As Scout dragged Mia back, his left foreleg passed too close. The snake struck, a blur of muscle and fang, a sound like a leather whip snapping. Scout yelped, a short, guttural sound, and his body jerked. But he didn't let go. With one final tug, he pulled Mia out of range and dropped her beside a flower pot near the porch. Then, wobbling, he turned back toward the threat, body low, one paw already beginning to swell. Inside the utility room, the laundry basket hit the floor. Rachel had heard the yelp. She bolted toward the kitchen and threw open the back door just in time to see Scout collapse sideways onto the grass, a dark smear blooming along his leg. Mia sat blinking in shock, silent for once, her tiny hands still clutching a pine cone. Rachel didn't scream. Her mind had been trained for emergencies, sharpened over years of responding to crisis calls and wounded animals. But what she saw rooted her in place. The snake was still coiled near the quilt, head raised, rattling again. Scout lay motionless, breathing fast. She sprinted forward, scooped up Mia, and ran to the porch, heart pounding like hooves against rock. She deposited the child into the playpen and turned back, grabbing the long-handled shovel that leaned against the wall. With practiced care, she approached the snake, not to kill, but to move it. The creature hissed and recoiled, but Rachel used the shovel's edge to nudge it toward a storage bin she kept near the shed. It took 3 tries, and her hands were shaking. But eventually, the snake dropped into the plastic with a heavy thud. She slammed the lid shut and weighted it down with a cinder block. Then she ran to Scout. His breathing was fast and shallow. The bite mark on his leg had already begun to swell. The surrounding fur darkened and matted. His eyes fluttered as Rachel knelt beside him, her voice trembling, whispering his name. 2 ridges away, the sharp sound of a dog's yelp echoed faintly through a pair of binoculars. Owen Whitaker, seated on his porch with his thermos in hand, stiffened. He turned the focus knob quickly, narrowing in on the Turner property. Something was wrong. He adjusted again and spotted Rachel running. First to the porch, then back to the yard. He stood, with a speed not typical of his age. Owen set down his coffee and grabbed his jacket, his old dirt bike. A dusty red Yamaha he hadn't used in months was parked beside the shed. He gunned the ignition and tore down the gravel road, stones skittering under the tires. He reached the property in under 2 minutes. Rachel didn't flinch when she heard the engine. She was crouched beside Scout with her phone to her ear. Owen cut the engine and approached slowly. "I saw it from my porch," he said without breath. "What do you need?" Rachel looked up, her face pale. "Rattler. Scout got bit saving Mia." "I'll drive." "No, I've got it," she replied, lifting Scout gently into a blanket. "But help me get him into the truck." They worked in silence, urgency overriding awkwardness. Owen opened the truck door while Rachel cradled the dog into the back seat. Scout let out a soft whimper, but didn't resist. Rachel strapped Mia into her car seat with trembling hands. "Vet's 40 minutes out. Dr. Landry's clinic in Cody. He's the only one with anti-venom for dogs." Owen nodded. "Drive safe. Call me after." Rachel gave a quick nod, climbed in, and gunned the engine as the dust curled behind her taillights. Owen stood in the gravel, watching until the truck disappeared beyond the curve. Then he turned back to the house, walked slowly to the porch, and sat down next to the still trembling playpen. Mia looked up at him with wide eyes. He didn't say a word, just reached through the bars and let her wrap her small fingers around his thumb. The clinical smell of antiseptic clung to the air inside the Cody Veterinary Clinic, where Scout lay motionless on the steel examination table. The sterile lights above buzzed faintly, casting pale halos across the tiled floor. Tubes ran from his leg to an IV bag, and a pale monitor blinked slowly beside him. His breathing was shallow, barely lifting the rise of his chest, the swelling around his front leg, bitten cleanly by the rattlesnake, had already spread up toward his shoulder. Rachel Turner sat beside the table, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her fingers were red from wringing, her lips pressed into a line that barely moved. She hadn't spoken since the vet. Dr. Landry administered the anti-venom. That was nearly an hour ago, he had warned her. The venom was aggressive, the reaction unpredictable, and the next few hours would be crucial. Scout was young, healthy and strong, but that didn't mean he'd pull through. Rachel's face was tight with guilt. She hadn't cried yet, but her chest ached in the way only those who blame themselves can understand. She kept replaying it, just 60 seconds inside the house, 1 minute of laundry, and now, the dog who had trusted her, who had saved her daughter, was fighting for his life. In the quiet corner of the room stood Owen Whitaker. He hadn't taken a seat. His hands were shoved deep into his old canvas jacket, shoulders hunched slightly forward. He hadn't said much on the drive over, just grunted directions and helped carry Scout in. He looked at the limp body of the pup, then at Rachel, then down at the floor. The silence was thick. Still. He cleared his throat. "You think it's your fault," he said softly. Rachel didn't look at him. "It is. No, it ain't," he said, more firmly now. "It's the wild. It doesn't wait for permission." She finally glanced up, and in her expression was something raw and exposed. "I left her. He had to protect her because I didn't—" Owen stepped closer but kept his voice low. "You want to know why I never said a word about those snakes?" Rachel frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I found skins, 3. Behind your fence line. I knew what they meant." He exhaled through his nose, but I didn't say anything. She stared at him, stunned. Why, his mouth twisted. "Because I've been a damn fool for a long time." And then, without warning, he spoke words he hadn't said aloud in years. "My daughter, Lily, she was 6 when we lost her, bitten by a rattler near Snake Creek. She died before we made it back to town." Rachel's breath caught. She was fast, and I was too far behind. He continued, voice low and distant. "I blamed myself. Her mother blamed me, too, after that. I just stopped talking to people, trusting myself to do anything right." He looked at Scout, unconscious and breathing in labored rhythm. "That's why I didn't knock on your door last week when I saw that dog blocking your little girl from that corner of the yard. I knew he'd sensed something, but I didn't act. Same mistake, just later in life." Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why tell me now? Because watching you sit here blaming yourself feels a whole lot like the way I spent the last 15 years. He looked her in the eye. "Don't carry that weight if you don't have to." She said nothing for a long while, just nodded slowly. The tension in her posture easing, not because the guilt was gone, but because she was no longer carrying it alone. Then, the door creaked open and Dr. Landry stepped in, clipboard in hand. His tone was measured, but not cold. He's stable for now, no sign of shock, and the swelling's plateaued. That's good, but we still have to wait. Sometimes the venom rebounds. It'll be a long night. Rachel stood and nodded. "Can I stay with him?" "Yes, and we'll keep him on fluids and observation. If things keep improving, you'll know by morning." Owen stepped back toward the door, his face unreadable, before leaving. He paused. "I'll check on the fence line tomorrow," he said quietly. "Make sure nothing else crawls in." Rachel managed a faint smile. "Thank you." "Owen?" He nodded, then disappeared down the hall. Rachel pulled up a chair next to Scout and reached for his paw. It was warm beneath the bandage. The fight wasn't over, but for now. He was holding on. The wind rolled softly across Buffalo Creek, warmer than expected for late October. Leaves fluttered from the cottonwoods in slow spirals, painting the grass in gold and rust. Rachel stood at the edge of her porch, hand resting on the post, eyes locked on the narrow gravel road that wound up from town. A layer of dust stirred in the distance, just enough to make her heart skip. Scout was coming home. It had been 5 days since the bite, each hour measured in vitals, swelling, and hopeful glances from the vet staff against the odds. The young German shepherd had not only stabilized but begun to recover faster than any of them expected. By the 3rd day, he was standing by the 4th. He had eaten from Rachel's hand, tail wagging faintly. Now, on the 5th, Dr. Landry had cleared him to return. Rachel exhaled slowly, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair behind her ear. The porch door creaked open behind her. Mia stepped out, wrapped in a purple cardigan. Her cheeks flushed from her nap. Her curls were a bit tangled, and one sock had slipped halfway off. She carried a toy rabbit by the ear in one hand, the other rubbing her eye sleepily. Rachel knelt. "You ready to see our scout?" Mia nodded, still too drowsy to speak. The truck crested the hill and pulled into the driveway with a crunch of gravel. Owen stepped out first. He wore his usual faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up over weathered forearms, and a pair of heavy boots stained with earth. He opened the passenger door, and Scout hopped down carefully, still favoring his bandaged leg, but alert and upright. Mia's face lit up. Scout. It was the first time she had said his name clearly, and it stopped Rachel in her tracks. Her daughter, barely 2, had just spoken the name of the dog who had saved her life. Scout's ears perked, and he limped forward, tail sweeping side to side like a metronome of emotion. Mia ran to meet him, tripping slightly in the grass. Rachel started forward to stop her, but Scout had already reached her, gently nudging her upright with his nose. He sat beside her, tail still wagging. Rachel felt her eyes blur. She blinked quickly, swallowed hard, and crossed the lawn. "Thank you," she said quietly to Owen as he shut the truck door. Owen just nodded. "He'll still need antibiotics for another week." Landry gave me the instructions. Rachel crouched to check the bandage, but Scout was steady, bright-eyed. He wasn't fully healed, but he was home that evening, after a light supper and a warm bath for Mia. Rachel walked the perimeter of the backyard with a hammer and coil of mesh in hand. She'd spent the last 2 days ordering snake-proof fencing and repurposing parts of the old chicken wire she had in the barn. Now, she hammered in the final stake just as the last of the sunlight slipped behind the ridge. Scout followed her, his steps careful, not hurried. He sniffed the new fencing with interest, then turned his head toward the tree line as if checking to see if the shadows still held anything dangerous. Inside, Mia was playing by the kitchen window with a bowl of water and plastic cups. She dropped one and giggled as it splashed. Rachel dried her hands on a towel and stepped out again to find Scout lying beside the playmat they'd laid out near the porch. Mia had wandered out with her rabbit and sat down beside him. She poured water into a tiny plastic bowl and offered it to him as if in repayment. He didn't drink, but watched her with eyes that never strayed. Later, as the light faded into lavender dusk, Owen returned, this time. He carried a canvas satchel with worn leather straps and a whistle on a lanyard. Rachel met him halfway down the path, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked. "Training kit," Owen said with a half-smile. "You said he was smart. Might as well teach him more than watching fence lines. They started with basic cues: heel, stay, down. Scout already knew some. Rachel had taught him during their first week, but Owen's approach was different, more patient, rooted in the quiet rhythms of ranch life. He didn't raise his voice or offer treats, just worked with timing, tone, and presence. "Animals don't learn because of rewards," Owen explained, gesturing for Scout to sit. "They learn because they understand trust and boundaries." Rachel nodded, watching the old man kneel beside her dog with an ease that came from years of silent understanding. For the first time in months, her property didn't feel like a place to hide. It felt like the beginning of something again. Over the following week, Owen returned daily. Sometimes he stayed only 10 minutes, other times an hour. He brought chew toys made from braided rope, a homemade paw salve for Scout's healing skin, and once, even a bag of oatmeal cookies for Mia. Scout's leg improved quickly. By the end of the week, he was putting more weight on it. The bandage came off, revealing pink skin and faint scarring. Rachel rubbed the area gently, murmuring, "You'll have a story to tell someday." The story, of course, had already begun telling itself. In town, word had spread of the snake, the child, and the dog who intervened. Dr. Landry had told a few colleagues, who told a few more, now. Strangers at the post office nodded to Rachel with something like reverence, but she kept to herself. Letting the attention slide away, what mattered was here, on this land, in this moment. One afternoon, as golden light soaked the hills and wind ruffled the meadow grass. Rachel sat on the back steps with a mug of tea. Mia played in a shallow kiddie pool nearby, scooping water with her hands. Scout lay beside the pool, head resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving her. Rachel watched them both and breathed in deeply, for the first time in a long while. There was peace, sometimes. The greatest miracles come in the form of small, silent protectors, like a young German shepherd who gave everything to save the child he loved. Scout didn't need words or commands to act. Something deeper guided him, a divine instinct, a thread of grace that God Himself may have woven into the bond between animals and humans, in a world full of noise and uncertainty. This story reminds us that faith can be quiet and fierce, and that angels don't always come with wings. Sometimes they come with fur and a wagging tail. Let this be a gentle whisper from heaven. Protection can appear in the most unexpected forms, and love, true, sacrificial love, is never wasted. If this story moved your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below with the word Amen if you believe that Scout was guided by something greater. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and help us spread more stories of love, faith, and redemption. May God bless and protect you and those you love, just as He protected little Mia through Scout. Amen.